Archon the Ever-Chosen swung his flickering blade. Commander Skag Fiercegear fell headless to the ground, slumping amongst the rest of the Obsidian legionaries all over the fort's courtyard.
Delay all you wish. Time is meaningless now,
Archon said. He raised his hand. His champions flashed from their hidden realm to appear beside him.
Cross the desert and destroy them.
The order took hold, and the champions disappeared. Archon looked around at the slain. He regretted killing them, for they would need more Jar to properly break open the Carracks. Furthermore, Archon couldn't help but wonder what was giving the dwarves the strength to fight on, even with Uldor's life and elven magic wiped away. The notion that the mortal realm might have fighting spirit to rival that of the twisted gods, yet entirely unaffected by it, was a secret that said gods carefully kept. Champion Archon was in a better place to question this than anyone, while still in no place at all. And so, he dispelled his sword and launched himself up to his waiting dragon overlooking the courtyard. With the capture of Copher came access to the roads to Atalan, although it was not the easiest or shortest route. Other approaches were being tested. The huge surface citadel at Khemri was stormed by Kolek Suneater and his dragon ogres, ploughing across the desert to bring their mighty picks and hammers to the walls. At Al-Haik and Firus, the Chaos fleets had an easier landing than at Copher, aided by the constant defection of the very Umgi refugees the dwarves were fighting to protect. Still, the legionaries and their remaining human allies held their strongpoints for as long as they could. They were expecting reinforcements, as per the official invasion defense plan. There was no way to reach them and tell them that the plan was now very different. The mobile legions were taking up posts in and around Atalan, especially in the Carracks. News of Uldor's situation began to spread, which in some cases deflated what hope remained, although in others simply left warriors resolved to perish in battle as required and be done with the struggle. As the procession from Copher passed under the mountains into the valley, many Dawi, warrior or not, came out to see their king in Eye of the Panther Carrack. They surely noticed that it was not obvious whether Uldor was gone. His body twitched constantly, tumbling in the winds of magic as the convoy travelled. Khazran's runestones lit up when placed anywhere near him, and when a soulstone was brought close, it resisted the movement until finally shattering of its own accord. He wasn't dead, not in every way possible at least. It was as Khazran had suspected and hoped. He said nothing of his plans though, simply carrying on through the Carrack and turning south towards Vulture Mountain. Story stayed behind, summoned to meet with Lord Redmane, master of Eye of the Panther by recent inheritance. "It's a foul thing below," Redmane said with shaking head. "Thagoraki worshippers we've made them. Foul, foul things. I wonder they live with our axes being so hungry." "If they indeed worship the rat, then they work for us," Story said firmly. "This was the king's will." "Indeed, indeed, and I see that plain, and I hear much of battles near and far. I wonder what the king's will has in store for us now. Keep as many corrupted Umgi locked up here as you can, and let them chant to the great horned rat. Summon the vile thing if that's even possible. We've weapons aplenty to direct its power against the foe." "Like its Caven Blight, will that be?" "Let's not rule that out." "Ah, well, it was nice to hope, wasn't it? Perhaps the king's true will is simply that we'll die on our own terms, by our own ingenuity. That'll snub the schemes of chaos just a little, eh?" "Lord Redmane, there is battle afoot. The time to think of death is upon its momentary arrival. For now, prepare this Carrack to fight." "And you'll be off?" "We'll return if our plan is ready in time." "A cheap promise, and I'd have no bit of it from anyone but you, Thane. I know you've the lives of us old Atalan born at heart. So if I understand things correctly, we'll need to pool all the warp fire fuel into one place." "Hold out until we arrive, use your warp fire weapons and kill the Umgi if anything goes wrong." Say no more, not a single word further. I understand entirely. Then we'll be away quickly, only to hasten our return. Expect everything Chaos has, from the surface and the tunnels at once. I couldn't hope for better. Safe travels then, Thane. Safe keeping, seriously. What a way to go, Redmayne mused as he turned away with an empty smile. Story hurried after the Legion to Vulture Mountain. The Carrack was alive with activity. The myriad redoubts and forts on the surface were being filled with stores of powder and ale. The Engineers Guild, pride of the Carrack, was showing the Legionnaires how to operate the static charge emitters. Long lines of conducting wires were being pinned to the walls, ultimately leading to blasting charges at all key doorways. Small groups of Umgi were trudging around with their heads bowed, chaperoned by axe-wielding Dawi. Any tunnels or caves high enough for beasts to fly in were having long chains hung from the ceiling, dotted with thorny spikes. And a recent lesson learned at Copher was being employed. Water pipes were fitted to service emplaced Gatling guns at the strongpoints. The noise of all this work was inescapable, but it was music to the ears of all who heard it. The sound of progress. The sound of honest work with a clear goal. It was just what the ultimate bastion of life in a dying world needed to hear. While the Legion was busied with such labours, an elite team was taken 2 levels below the labyrinthine defences to the seat of the Engineers Guild. Following rumours of these chosen engineers, Story ventured in. As he entered the guild hall, he found all the benches piled against the walls, clearing a space in the middle of the room. There lay Uldor, twitching on a golden table. Khazran stood beside him, directing his team to erect scaffolds around the walls. He barely noticed Story approach. "If the Soulstones can revive him, why delay?" Story asked. "Because being revived right now is more of a punishment than a pleasure, Khazran said. "Take this seriously. I am Thane. You think I'm just entertaining myself here? I do worry. We're going to keep the king safe. And keep the Carrack safe. I think, anyway. Just tell me what you're doing." "I would, but you wouldn't believe it." "What a strange time and place to assume such a thing." "Okay, well listen to this." Story went white, red, and almost blue listening to Khazran's plan. When the explanation was over, he turned and walked out at a pace. "I'll give you all the time I can," Story said. Khazran's grateful nod went unnoticed. Then he got back to work only he was able to conceive. You see, from Khazran's point of view, the guild hall was flickering and flashing with a lively sea of cool light. The whole room was filled with fluorescing wraiths, passing in and out, up and down, and seeming to circle around him in ever-growing numbers. It would have been beautiful had there not been the sound of an everlasting breath wheezing out, only growing louder with time. The breaking of the Soulstones had unleashed necromantic energies in concentrations not seen since the time of the great sorcerer Nagash, and the spirits of immortal Araby were bewitched by the idea that their overlord had come again, and so they flocked to Khazran, awaiting orders or fresh bodies. Khazran aimed not to disappoint. Whatever he was up to, it would mean nothing if the world ended quickly, and that was certainly the pace it seemed to be keeping. The noose was tightening. In the west, the main Chaos Armada was arriving day by day from across the oceans, shaking the ground with the footfall of mustering knights. Archon plotted his course south to destroy the Nehekaran cities the Dawi had preserved on the edge of the desert, and from there east through the closest pass to Vulture Mountain. Lesser captains secured the northern coast quickly. While heavily fortified, its ramparts had been depleted by insurrection and retreat. The eastern castles allowed for no such retreat, besieged not just on the surface but below too. Chaos troops were well aware that digging down anywhere close to a Dawi stronghold was likely to reveal secret passages, and hence these too were locked off and guarded at all hours. The Chaos soldiers forced to conduct the sieges were just as grumpy as those subjected to them, for they missed the fun the rest of their host was sure to have as it moved on to the famous mountains. The sapping blows of dragon ogres were brought to the mouth of Atalan, where the expanded fortress of Martek all but blocked entry to the preserved domain. Kolek sent his beastman auxiliaries to make their way across the mountains elsewhere, but needed to forge an easy entrance for the human warriors streaming into his camp. There were few trees to make siege engines from, and waiting for cannons to be brought from the coast would only damage Kolek's reputation, which was far more valuable than the lives of mere peons, of course. Therefore, the Chaos Army was sent to provide a general distraction while the Dragon Ogres tunneled through the outer wall. Martek's battlements were glistening with silver armor and colorful banners flapped above. This fort had been assigned to the military refugees, mostly Imperial and Bretonnian humans. While the greater fighting strength of these peoples was long gone, they still had enough gusto to man a beleaguered wall with guns, longswords, and spears. The Chaos troops ran forwards and hurled hooked ropes over the ramparts. It was ineffective, being as they were so easy to cut. However, by throwing them all over the place, few troops were spared to loose crossbow bolts into the gathering herd of dragon ogres in the dry riverbed bisecting the center of the wall. Giants came to the walls and began simply lifting Chaos soldiers to the top. Handfuls of armored berserkers flailed great axes into the defenders. Bretonnian archers, lightly armored, were cut apart. Imperial skirmishers wore steel cuirasses and mail, faring better. However, the giants had plenty more little toys to put on the noisy shelf. All this let the hooks take hold, and more Chaos troops began ascending the walls all over. In response, the Imperial heavy swordsmen and Bretonnian men-at-arms brought wide shields and strong arms to stem the tide on the wall tops. The distraction had been a success. The hammers of the Dragon Ogres began to break through the final bricks of the riverbed wall. Their attack had not gone unnoticed, however, and inside a force was assembling to fight in the breach. In the riverbed itself was a warrior missing both their left arm and left eye, riding a curtained horse below a red banner with a yellow flower. A footman came up beside her and handed her a box. She looked at the knights around her, their armor torn and scorched, their coats of arms defaced almost beyond recognition.
"Take it. Lead us in this charge, my lady,"
one of them insisted. She opened the box and took out a golden crown, spotted with jewels, but more so with gaps where jewels once nested. She threw off her helmet, then carefully slid the piece over her head. The bricks in the wall started to topple outwards.
"Everyone, it has been a pleasure,"
she said softly. She pulled down her banner and twirled it around the end of her silver spear.
"For the lady!"
a knight cried. A great cheer went up, spiced with wails and tears. The Bretonnian militias nearby had their eyes fixed on that floral banner as it rose on the tip of a spear. The last pieces of the wall were rammed aside. The bright trumpets sounded.
"Fly and be free of this!"
the leader called out, her horse pushing into a trot. Shouts of "Follow the banner" were made all around as the knights advanced into a gallop, then a thundering charge, the militias rushing after them. They only lost sight of that last banner when it was levelled and driven through the chest of a dragon ogre. Longbow arrows whooshed into the ogres lunging through the breach, and the many spears and maces of the footmen took the beasts by surprise. Some were felled, and others turned back, blocking the flow of reinforcements. But Kolek was not like them. With twice their size and 10 times their courage, he squeezed through the wall and ploughed the Bretonnians back with heaves of his great hammer. Arrows could not pierce his hide, let alone his armor. His weakness, though, was clear to see. His neck was writhing with fiery tendrils, marking the point at which his head had been previously removed by Uldor's legion. How it returned to his possession after its destruction was impossible to know, but everyone had heard of the deed. Seeing it reaffixed by strange magic, the route forward was clear. The Bretonnian queen rode to confront Kolek and got his attention at once. The beast knew the value of a human in a crown. He brought his hammer down upon her, but it was stopped by a yellow light gleaming at the end of her spear. With a grunt, she thrust the hammer out of her way, twirled the spear to grip it overhand, then launched it straight up into that glowing neck. Kholek roared across the mortal realm and his own when the blade dug into that reminder of his shame. He tried to flick it out. It only broke the shaft, and the movement sent another barrage of pain through his whole being and soul. "Be cleansed, unholy beast!" the queen called. Then, with sudden speed, Kholek dropped his hammer and grasped her with both hands. He threw her horse to one side, smashing into the Bretonnian ranks, then flattened the queen against the side of the wall with a crunch. The Bretonnians were aghast and felt their spirit snatched away. Then someone called, "Follow the banner" again. It was there at Kholek's neck, half lodged in his wound. In a miracle worthy of Bretonnian legend, the militia rallied and came at Kholek in a frenzy, cutting at his armor and sawing into his hide. Blinded by pain, Kholek found it hard to even understand where the attacks were coming from. It might have been his end, had he been on his own. Alas, his army was now pouring through the breach, and in places had secured routes down from the walls. The Bretonnian army was forced into brutal fighting at close quarters, outmatched by most of the dedicated killers Chaos had in their employ. Kholek was able to turn away and slump against the wall, staring at the yellow crown in the gore dripping beside him. The arrival of beastmen from the south ended all resistance, with none surviving their final battle. They had, though, taken a sizable chunk of that particular Chaos army with them, and left Kholek in a state of torturous pain. And there was another advantage to be fished from the drain of hope at Martek. What remained of mortal life was now concentrated ever more in just a few locations. The effect of the mortal life force on the fabric of the various realities was growing stronger, more focused. It was this effect that had already empowered Khazran's soulstones to awaken army from the dead at Copher, albeit for a short time. Such powers were only growing as the mortal realm shrank. There were 2 bolts left in the dwarven quiver then, the rejuvenated strength of warp fire magic, only a fraction of what it once was, and the spoils of their campaigns through the desert so long ago, the soul stones, that were inflating in power with every being that perished in the advancing maw of the end times. Of course, these were worthless without a third card to play, the ingenuity of dwarven engineering. That was what was about to be truly tested. Kholek and the armies of the east marched for Eye of the Panther. Archon and the armies of the west marched for Vulture Mountain. No 2 places in the world had been preparing for this moment for longer than these. Their king was good as dead, their numbers depleted in merciless battles or trapped in hopeless sieges, and their allies at Martek had not even held for a single day. Sounds like the sort of job only a dwarf can take care of.